Hello everybody, and welcome to another YouTube video lecture. 5.5, because this is one of the newer ones that I'm putting up. As you remember, I'm constantly asking you to look at some of the older ones. So just keep that in mind. I'll put out there on Edmodo specifically to look at this one from 2016. I believe today is October 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. No school Monday, yay! All right, this one's going to deal with the War of 1812, and I'm going to try and go through this as quickly as possible because there's not a whole lot of information you need to know about the War of 1812, but there is at least some very specific things I do want you to know as we go through this. Our key concept for the War of 1812 is 4.1, Roman numeral 1a. We were doing this one in class the other day. If you remember, we were focusing on this part, powers of the federal government, right? The debates that came out of the early 1800s. We did that. We were looking at Jefferson's administration. But now we're going to look at the second part, relations with European powers, France, and predominantly here Great Britain. Now, the United States has been having a very rough situation with these two countries, especially we know with France. With Washington, he declares neutrality. John Adams has his XYZ affair and a quasi-war with the French, which led to his Alien and Sedition Acts, and Jefferson comes back with Kentucky, Virginia resolutions, and there's all these problems with the French because of that. Then, of course, Jefferson, and if you remember, he's the one that passes the "Oh, grab me." Remember, "Oh, grab me"? Embargo spelt backwards, and it hurt more the American economy than anything else. And now James Madison inherits this problem. And it's this problem that begins to grow between both the French and the English because they're at war with each other, these Napoleonic wars, Napoleon. And it's eventually going to lead to war, not with the French, but with the British. Well, why is that happening? Well, there's a lot of things that are changing in America. This 12th Congress, for instance. That means the 12th elected Congress and its history. Very different than its predecessors because it's very, very young. It's a bunch of young guys who were not really around during the American Revolution. They didn't serve or fight. They were either just born and were babies or maybe born shortly afterwards. So they never went through the American Revolution. The Congresses prior to this all had very veteran men in there who had been around for the American Revolution and for the early going of the Articles of Confederation, switching to the Constitution. Now you have a bunch of young guys in there. These young guys aren't acquainted with war, and they're going to start feeling that the British are really hurting American pride, and they're going to become known as war hawks, men who are going to start pushing for war. Henry Clay is a newly elected man from Kentucky. He becomes the Speaker of the House at this time. Another guy we'll talk about later on, John C. Calhoun from the South Carolina. He'll also be a war hawk. And some of the things that they're really upset about with the British are these three main things here. Orders in Council. Well, what is Orders in Council? That's a fancy term that comes from British Parliament. An order from their council. In this regard, in American history, we use this term collectively. There were a group of these orders that started in the late 1800 to the early 18th century to the early 19th century that would restrict Americans' trade. The British would order various naval blockades of areas they thought that maybe Americans or other neutral countries might try to trade with the French. So they were called these Orders in Council, the stop trade via blockades. The first one was in 1783. And then we get here into the 1800s, 1803, 1804, 1805. They're passing a series of orders of council that is constantly blockading American ships so they cannot trade anywhere in the world where they might wind up trading with the French. And of course, this also ties right into this idea of impressment. And this is something we've talked quite a bit about. Not only would they stop American trade, but they would board American merchant ships and impress our sailors into their navy. And of course, that one moment we talked about in class, the Chesapeake incident, where they attacked an American naval ship. And that should have been an act of war there in 1807, and that's when Jefferson decides instead to do his blockade, his embargo. They're also breaking the Treaty of 1783 that ended the American Revolution and Jay's Treaty of 1794, where they promised to stop arming Indians in the Ohio Valley, and they are not doing that. In fact, they're giving a lot of weapons, and two Shawnee brothers, Tecumseh and his brother known as the Prophet, recreate that Confederacy we talked about earlier on with Chief Little Turtle, the Miami Confederacy. They recreate this, and a massive war breaks out in Indiana. And Tecumseh is, again, one of these great Indian chiefs. He wins many battles, but it's the Battle of Tippecanoe where General William Henry Harrison defeats Tecumseh's forces, although Tecumseh actually wasn't there. His brother, the Prophet, was, and the Prophet dies at the Battle of Tippecanoe. But notice the year is 1811. So there is a lot of war with Native Americans going on in the United States at the time period, and this is angering members of Congress. So again, orders in council, impressment, and arming Native Americans. Those are the three big reasons why the United States finally declares war on Great Britain. Now it's interesting, the war message. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the President of the United States would give a war message. But Madison, being Madison, decided to kind of jump ahead. He didn't just want Congress to declare war without the president's involvement. It does say in the Constitution that the president from time to time can give matters of the state of affairs to Congress. He can call Congress together for emergency sessions. So he decides the president should take a lead in this, because remember, he is commander-in-chief. It should also be duly noted that the year 1812 is Madison's re-election year. Going into that summer, he knows that he's up for re-election. He knows there's many members in Congress that are already thinking about declaring war. Why not get ahead of this and see like I'm on their side and get my re-election, which he does. So in June of 1812, the United States, for its first time ever, declares war. And this time they do it against Great Britain. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. This is a massive headache for the United States. America had no money. America really had no army. They had no navy. And they're declaring war on Great Britain. They're declaring war on Great Britain. Think about this for a moment. France, Napoleon, invades Russia with over 1 million troops during this time period. The United States tries to invade Canada with roughly 10 to 12,000 troops. What was the United States thinking? And it goes horribly wrong. They lose their invasion of Canada. The British land in the Washington, D.C. area, and they eventually burn down the Capitol building. They burn down the White House. They burn down the Library of Congress. Yeah, that doesn't look very good for you. There's a moment in Detroit where the general with this army, he decides to surrender to the British without firing a shot. So a lot of embarrassing blunders. Most of the victories that the United States have is on the Great Lakes. Both the British and the United States put ships onto the Great Lakes, and America wins those battles. There's also the attack of Fort McHenry in Maryland. That's where we get the famous Francis Scott Key's Star-Spangled Banner poem, because they kept bombarding the Fort McHenry, and yet they were never able to take it, and the American flag continued to fly. So there were some good things here. But notice something. America, within 2 years, they begin to send envoys to Europe, to Ghent, to negotiate for peace. John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay are the two leaders of this. And in December of 1814, the war comes to an end. Now again, follow along. December of 1814, this war is over. Its most famous battle, though, the Battle of New Orleans, which is what this is a picture of, happens between January 8th through the 18th of 1815. So its most famous battle took place almost a month after the war was already over. Because again, no telephones, it's not like you can call people. But this is a famous battle, not only because America won the battle, it created a hero in Andrew Jackson. He is the general who oversaw this battle. But in all honesty, he probably should have lost. The Americans dug just a very long trench that the British could have easily have gone around the trench, but the British, being British, decided to keep attacking straight on, and Jackson's forces, and there's a painting of Jackson standing like a hero, just mowed down these British dragoons. Jackson's army, too, is also very American because it's made up of a lot of different things. His army at the Battle of New Orleans, you have regular men in the army, you have some militia from various states, pirates. Jean Lafitte is the only pirate in American history that will get a full pardon from the President of the United States because he participated. Native American Indians were here. Both free and enslaved blacks were also part of this army. A very American army indeed. And they inflict heavy, heavy casualties on the British. And it makes Jackson a massive war hero and will catapult him into national politics. As we know, he will become a president here later on. And this is the moment that made him famous. All right, here's something you absolutely do have to know. The War of 1812 begins the death toll, or the death knell, or the beginning of the end for the Federalist Party. The Federalists will never support this war. Remember, they're pro-British. They're the ones that want to trade with the British. This war is hurting that trade. There's a small group, a small vocal minority who actually begin to propose seceding from the Union. Let's break away from the United States and join Canada. There are blue light Federalists. These individuals who go down to the shorelines there where the British are coming in, and they're using lanterns and putting blue light on them. That's why they're called blue light Federalists, so they can illegally trade with them. They're committing acts of treason by doing this. And then they decide to hold a massive convention in Hartford, Connecticut, December 15th, 1814 to January 5th, 1815. So they have no idea that the Treaty of Ghent is about to be signed. They have no idea that Andrew Jackson is going to win the Battle of New Orleans. They hold this convention, and they decide they're going to come to Washington, and they're going to give all their grievances. They want financial support for all lost trade going back to the Embargo Act under Jefferson. They want an amendment to the Constitution that states you got to get a 2/3 vote to go to war from Congress. You got to get 2/3 vote to create new states. You got to get a 2/3 vote to have an Embargo Act again. They also want to get rid of the 3/5 clause, and they want presidents to serve for only one term because they don't want Virginians to have 2 terms anymore. They had a lot of complaints. Now you got to imagine, think for a second here. There is no car, no train yet, no airplane. It's just horses and wagons. There are no roads yet really built. And it's wintertime. Your little convention comes to an end. But it took more than a month for these 3 knucklehead Federalists, and their names are really kind of lost to us in history. I'm sure I could find them out there if I tried. I just don't care. They come to a burnt down Washington, D.C. Remember, because the British have burnt the Capitol building, they burnt the White House, the Library of Congress, several other buildings. They're trying to rebuild already, but they get there about February, and word has also got to Washington, D.C. that Jackson won the Battle of New Orleans. The Treaty of Ghent has been signed. So Americans are actually feeling like they won this war. Congress is meeting in a rented room, and these 3 guys decide anyways to list all their grievances. President James Madison was there, and history says he began to laugh out loud when he heard these complaints. This will officially kill this Federalist Party, because Americans were feeling like they had won a great war. The Battle of New Orleans, to them, signifies the winning of this war. The British sign a peace treaty. They are going to stop arming the Indians. They're going to stop. Finally, impressment is going to end. Even though no territory is gained and everything basically went back to status quo, America felt good about itself. And here come the Federalists. they will not really be a political party. They will run the election of 1816, and that's their last election. They will die forever as a political party. Alexander Hamilton's party is gone now forever. But there was one thing about the Federalists that the Republicans realized that they made a mistake. Remember the Bank of the United States, Alexander Hamilton's bank. He got a 20-year charter for it in 1791. This is the bank that oversees all the finances of the United States government. But the Republicans always hated the bank. They always hated it. So when its charter was up for renewal in 1811, the Republicans under Madison said, "No, thank you. We do not like you. Go away. Bye-bye." So they refused to renew the charter in 1811. And then they go to war in 1812. And they have no bank, no way to finance the war, no way to build new roads, to move armies from one place to another, no way to, take care of the army, arm the army, you got to buy weapons and all that kind of stuff. You can't do that. The Secretary of the Treasury at the time will go to James Madison and will say, "We have hardly enough money to last to the end of the month." That was 1813. To begin to negotiate an end to this war. My point is, when we get back into class, we're going to talk about how James Madison will change his mind about the bank. How many Republicans will begin to change their mind about the bank. And in 1816, a second bank comes back. We get a second bank in 1816, and that's going to be very, very important to take note of. So if any of this was confusing, please watch it again. The first bank had a 20-year charter, 1791. Its charter was up for renewal in 1811, and the Republicans said no to it. "We don't want you. Go away." Then they go to war. They run out of money. They realize maybe we got to bring it back, and they do. And we'll talk about that specifically in class. This is also after this war. I told you the Federalists go away. This ushers in what they call in history the era of good feelings. Only one political party is left, Jeffersonian Republicans. James Monroe is a two-term Virginian president. He's from Virginia, Southern guy, last of the Revolutionary War heroes. But was this really a one-party system? Turns out the Republicans are divided. Henry Clay, who we're going to start talking a lot about, is a national Republican. After the War of 1812, he wants a national America, one America for everybody. And he wants a bank, and he wants internal improvements, he wants roads, he wants highways, he wants canals built, and he wants the government to do this to create a modern America. But Southern Republicans start calling themselves Democratic Republicans. And they don't like the fact that the Constitution is being abused in their minds by these national guys. And that's going to open the door for Andrew Jackson. And that's how he gets in there, because of this party split. And again, we'll talk more about that later on. Please go to our textbook, America's History, Henrietta's America's History. That's our big textbook, pages 222 to 230. You got question number 1 on page 233, though. Now, just because it looks like a lot of pages, remember, it's really not. There's a giant map on one page. There's one of those extra little readings there that I'm sure no one's going to do. It's really not a lot of reading. But make sure you understand this War of 1812 and that one particular question that's there. It starts at the subheading, the War of 1812 and the Transformation of Politics. And I like that clip art of James Madison there. All right. Hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and we'll see each other soon. Bye-bye.